Hi, everybody. My name is Anjali, and I'm going to be your host for today. We're here with Ozan Unlu. He is the CEO and founder of Edge Delta, which is an AI-powered observability platform. And before that, he worked for Microsoft and a bunch of other companies. So I'll just hand it over to you, and yeah, tell us about yourself. How are you doing?
Yeah, so thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this talk. Just a show of hands, who here knows about the concept of observability? Perfect, so looks like about 80%, which is great. So observability came up actually in this previous talk, and there was a talk about multiple different types of observability. Specifically, more traditional observability is about your production systems, right? So if you have a business, you have a service. If you're here at this conference, you probably have an online service that you're running that then creates revenue, and you want to ensure that service is both up to be able to get revenue, but also for the user experience. And so observability was a big part of that. Observability and understanding how your users are interacting with your service, and are they happy, what's the latency, error rates, millisecond response times from the core service itself on the front end and the experience to the user all the way to the back end and your various different systems. So that is observability. In the AI era, we are seeing a fundamental shift in observability in that if you look at tools like Lovable, Replit, even going further on to like the Vercel v0, all the way up to the Claude Code, Cursor, Codex, et cetera, we are seeing this kind of concept of vibe coding and AI very quickly start to make it into production systems, a lot quicker than we thought. Obviously, this is going to take a few more years before large enterprises start shifting the majority of their code writing into this more generative AI mindset, but we are seeing it quite a bit in the startup in the early stage. So the thing that we like to joke about is, developers right now have like all the fun, good candy and all the nice tools that they get to use, and they kind of are just throwing this problem over the fence to the ops teams. And what ends up happening is ops teams, where that ecosystem and that tool set is probably a lot less mature, they're having to deal with the additional chaos and the additional pace when it comes to how much the deployments are happening and how often production systems are changing and the effect it's happening on uptime and availability. So show of hands here as well. Who all has used kind of generative BDC, or BDC style tools like Lovable, Replit? Okay, again, about half the room. And then moving on kind of up the spectrum, more of those tools like Vercel v0 or something more in the more technical, okay, about 20% of the room. And then finally, the Claude Codes of the world. Okay, about half the room, yeah. So it is very interesting what's happening in that space, and it is very interesting. We at Edge Delta look at how do we solve that problem for observability using agentic AI. And we are starting to see this fundamental shift where even SREs and DevOps engineers are getting pulled into being more developers. And I do think that if you look at the extreme worldview in 3 to 5 years, it could just be that we have developers and they're just kind of expected to be able to go implement observability and use it effectively to be able to make sure production systems are up and running. So at Edge Delta, we're solving that problem in an agentic way. So again, think about it as we're kind of the counter to Claude Code in that whatever you want to create for actual businesses that are scaled up and having tons of revenue and it's really expensive when those systems go down, we want to be the counterpart to Claude Code. Once you basically go and throw this new service or this new deployment into production, how do you ensure that we have that feedback loop and iteration back into your generative AI and development?
Yeah, that's very cool. So do you see a future where there'll be no humans involved with observability at all? It'll be completely handled by AI. Is that something that could happen?
I was talking with my team internally this week actually, and I came up with this like funny little picture that I was going to put on a slide, and it's almost like this alien spacecraft, and there's the aliens in there, and those aliens might represent like agentic AI. And right now, AI is extremely good at theoretically understanding how it might behave. So you build software with AI, and the button's supposed to be there. And then how many times have we like screenshotted it and said like, hey, the button's not there. And it's like, oh my gosh, you're so right. The button isn't there. Okay, let me solve that, right? So we're seeing this quite a bit where theoretically it's very good at understanding what should happen or how something should behave. But it's very bad at understanding in the real world. And so in this analogy of the alien spaceship with the aliens, it's like they're almost throwing stuff down at Earth. And with Earth, there's, humans and animals and trees and rivers and lakes. And so it's not so much the standardized, very idealistic view of things. It's a messy production environment that has potentially lots of chaos and tech debt and all these other things. And so in that world, right now, it's still disjointed. It's still like the alien spaceship that's throwing these experiments down into the world, but not necessarily recovering those unless it's a human that is screenshotting error messages or copying and pasting back into cloud code. So that's the loop that we're looking to solve. Now, does it get to a point very quickly within, let's say, the next 12 to 18 months where all of a sudden you want to just kind of say, hey, every once an hour, go look at my production environments, all my logs, metrics, traces, events, everything that's emitting from my production systems, and just try to improve it, right? Try to increase performance by 5 or 10%, try to do these things, and then again, once you go and deploy that into production, again, keep completing that loop. I do see us probably the next 1 to 2 years get to a point where people do want that to be an autonomous thing that happens if they can trust that rollback, if they can trust that, okay, I'm not just going to wake up one day and my production systems have been down for 10 hours and I, looked over and I had got 400 pings on my phone that I didn't wake up to. So, I do think we're quite a bit away from us actually removing the humans in the loop, but we are starting to see operators become more orchestrators than wanting to do manual things to fix the next production issue.
So if we look into that same future, 5, 10 years down the line, when AI is kind of handling 99% of observability, who is your customer at that point? Is it still like VP of engineering at some company kind of signing you up, or is it just going to be embedded in software systems throughout? What do you envision there?
It's a good question. I think in the extreme view, we do start seeing a shift towards, and I wouldn't even call it a shift towards developers doing observability. I think it's more a shift towards people that traditionally were doing observability that are able to contribute a lot more on the product development side. The buyer, I think in that regard, I don't think it fundamentally changes. I think when it comes to how do you run production systems at scale, the lines are just being very blurred between those roles. And, we see this sometimes with our customer base where you have someone, you mentioned kind of like a CISO or someone at the VP level. If that person could give everyone a promotion and give everyone a raise and everything else, I think they would, right, if they had the capability. But that's not the reality of business, right? We're all here at a startup summit where you have to figure out how you can efficiently run your business. But I do think that there's an opportunity for all the ICs out there to start to elevate and be able to start making more strategic decisions. And that will fundamentally change the ability for a company to scale in the short term. And so I think I'm very excited for that. Does that mean that each one of these ICs individually could potentially be a buyer? Yeah, I think that is something that we're going to be seeing starting again at the startup and the mid-market space and working its way towards the enterprise. But I don't think the customer fundamentally changes in that regard.
So now we're in the situation where even on the development side, a lot of decisions are made by AI, and it's just going to go up from there. So we will, maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, it'll be a situation where AI is observing AI, right? So how do you then, some of the errors are very obvious, in the sense that you see latency and stuff like that. But if it's an AI error, like a logical or a behavioral error, how do you expect AI to detect that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it comes down to a matter of trust. Like in our system, for instance, our product, we have AI agents that work together to solve complex production issues. So we made a bet about 2 years ago when we started building this new product of ours that a single agent trying to one-shot a complex production issue was going to be very difficult. And so we said, okay, well, just like we worked with a bunch of our customers and we said, okay, when you have a production issue, what happens? Okay, you open Slack or you open Teams, everyone jumps into a channel or jumps into an existing channel, and someone says, okay, I'm seeing this error message and copy and paste it. Okay, I'm seeing this metric spike, copy and paste it. Okay, I'm seeing, these are the types of deployments that we've done in the last 24 hours, right? So everyone's kind of collaborating within that chat space. So when we were building our agentic team of these AI agents that work together, we kind of wanted to emulate that process, right? Just like evolution, where there's a reason why some birds' wings are shaped in a certain way for aerodynamics and whatever else. We thought about, okay, when you're solving a production issue, there's a reason why all these humans jump in and solve this problem in a specific way. So we wanted to emulate that. Then we went from there to saying, okay, well, how do we go evaluate the responses of these agents? Yes, we can do them manually, but then it was actually funny. You work at Microsoft. I worked there for 6 years. I worked there a long time ago. And a long time ago, when I was at Microsoft and Google was just in its early years of doing a run-up, there was actually this funny discussion where at Microsoft, there was about like a 4-to-1 ratio of ICs to managers. And at Google at the time, there was like a 25-to-1 ratio of ICs to managers. And at Microsoft internally, we talked a lot about, like, is that madness? Is it chaos? Is it dumb? Or is it genius? Like, we wonder. And the way they were able to have a 25-to-1 ratio is by a very, I would say, almost an aggressive peer review system. So engineers were calibrating other engineers, peers, and at a large enough sample size with enough engineers calibrating each other, it just works out, right? There might be some interpersonal conflict amongst some people, but large enough sample size, enough data, the top engineers will kind of bubble up to the top. We took the same approach with our agentic team. So we actually have an agentic team that will evaluate each other. And so every single time there's a response from an agentic team that does an investigation, a specific agent, the other agents in the ecosystem will actually go and evaluate that response. But again, it's a trust-building exercise. Even internally, when we look at this system, we are looking at, like, okay, the agents have all agreed this was a great response, but did it solve the core issue? Did it, if production was down, did it help very quickly go bring production back up again? So, again, I think it's a matter of trust. I think we will slowly start to build and elevate to that, where we can start trusting these systems more and more. I used to be a developer, but it was a long time ago. And until I started using Claude Code again, I didn't really write code for probably 5 or 6 years. I started using Claude Code a lot more, and I have a technical co-founder who's 10 times smarter than me. And he jokes because, like, I don't look at the code anymore. Like, why would I? The other weekend, like, I built a Rust app, and my co-founder was like, oh, that's awesome. Like, so Rust, like, I don't know. I literally didn't look at the code. I don't care. So I think, at some point now, can you do that and build a massive production system that has hundreds of thousands or millions of users? Maybe eventually, probably not today. But, for me specifically, I know my capabilities. I know where my experiences are at this point. And again, it comes down to a matter of trust. So I think we will slowly and progressively, and by the way, not very slowly, but progressively, as we build more trust, I think we can give over much more of the ownership and the control.
Yeah, so you talked about not even looking at the code there. So in terms of observability, if we have a situation where most of the issues are kind of solved by your AI agents and humans they no longer care, and then if an issue pops up that has never happened before and the AI agent isn't able to solve it, how do you solve the problem where the humans in the loop are no longer even familiar enough to jump right in and resolve it?
Yeah, I think it reminds me of who here is like a chess fan? Okay, so we have, again, about 20% of the room. Currently, for instance, there's like a candidates tournament that's happening, which is like one of the top tournaments of the year that basically goes and determines who gets to challenge the current world champion. And Magnus Carlsen is like one of the top players. He kind of ended up bowing out of the whole kind of more competitive tournament, this specific one, a couple of years ago. But he puts it best. So, chess computers have gotten so much better than humans starting about, let's call it 10, 15 years ago. And even the world's best players just lose in comedic fashion to these chess engines. And Magnus Carlsen had this great quote where he basically said, someone asked him, like, do you go and play against the computer a bunch? And he said, no, of course not. And they said, why? And he said, it's super frustrating because it makes these elementary mistakes. Like, it has no idea how to play the game, but somehow beats you every time. So, even the world's best player who, if you know chess, like, he is head and shoulders above most of the rest of the competition, a lot of times can't understand why things are happening the way they are. I think with enough data and enough of these systems, I think, yes, there is a risk that we get to the point where, sometimes we look at what happens with these AI agents and we're like, oh my gosh, that was pure genius. Other times we look and we're like, how could it be so dumb? But I think eventually over time, we will get to a point, just like, again, I don't look at the code, or even when I did code, right? Like, I went from C to C++ to C#. I didn't want to manage memory anymore at C, right? So, like, once you get to a certain point, you say, I kind of want that abstraction layer. And, will we see some pretty bad outages because of it? I mean, if anyone goes to, like, the Anthropic status page for how often is Claude up, they're struggling to stay at, like, 2 nines. 2 nines would have been madness, like, 5 years ago, pre-AI. But, of course, the time frame is also being compressed. So things are happening in business and tech a lot faster than they were before. So that means if you had 10 big production issues in a year, now you're having 10 big production issues in a month. And the reason why is because stuff is moving 10 times faster or 12 times faster, right? And so I think it is a progression. I think we do have to trust that these systems go. But I think, again, much like that Google example of a peer review system, enough data, enough of these success stories. And, some people look at Claude and they're like, well, this is unacceptable. Like, 2 nines is absolutely unacceptable. They're just going to go and completely lose. And it's like, wow, and some person actually online said it was like a trap. It's like, wow, what a trap. This is like quite the impressive trap that they fell into. But I think, over time, yes, we do have to improve from 2 nines. But also, you can't go and run your business and say, well, I think actually Dan put it up there on the slide, right? 90% versus 98%. Both those are below 99%, right? Can you be at 90% uptime and have a good enough support system or a good enough kind of fallback mechanism and be successful? I think you can. And I think the risk that you have to take in this era is you have to risk moving too fast, because the other risk is that someone else is just that aggressive and moves fast and goes and takes the market in front of you.
So what would be the biggest challenge that you're facing right now as the CEO, co-founder, but since everything's moving too fast, how do you move fast along with it?
I think, like, our original product was actually focused on an enterprise customer. And our second product we came out with was much more focused on mid-market. And I think it's very tempting to go after those enterprise customers because you have the multi-million-dollar contracts, you have kind of, this safety that you get with getting that revenue and locking it in with a big customer that, frankly, doesn't necessarily change every single part of their systems every year. But at the same time, I think once AI hit, probably starting about 18 to 24 months ago, we had to take a step back and look at our own product suite and say, how does this all look like in the AI era? When our customers slowly start becoming AI agents, and the agents are the ones that are going to use the product, are we in a good spot? Or do we need to kind of reinvent how we're building our systems and what we're offering to the market? So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, is how do you decide, what your ICP is and what segment of the market you're going to go after? I don't know if it's the right choice, but we're consciously making a decision to go down market to the startups and the mid-market because, again, we want to go build the future of what these systems are. And frankly, any enterprise, people ask all the time, enterprise, like, why do they move so slow? It's like, well, Microsoft, for instance, does anyone know, like, how much profit Microsoft makes in a day? It's a lot. It's like, if you want to do, gross or net, whatever, but let's just call it $250 million a day in profit, right? So if you're making $250 million a day in profit, you want to not mess that up. If you're a startup who's losing whatever it is, $100,000 a month or $1 million a month or whatever the number is, you want to stop losing that money, right? So it's very obvious that an enterprise is going to move slow because they're profitable and they make a lot of money, and their first order of business is not to mess that up, and then they want to go be aggressive and go open up new markets, right? And so who do we want to work with? We want to work with the people that are moving the fastest in the world and going and building the future. So we're making a conscious choice to not go chase the money, but instead go figure out how do we go build systems for those of us that are building tomorrow. And again, in the long term, we'll figure out if it was a smart decision or a dumb decision, but that's a conscious choice that we're making.
So is there a future where you get so good, you just make yourself obsolete because AI observability will be so embedded in all software systems that you as a separate entity would no longer be needed? Do you see a future there?
I mean, I think certainly it's an option for whether it's OpenAI or Anthropic or any of these kind of generative coding platforms to basically just have a command that just says, /utilize, /observify, like implement observability within my stack. I think that's very much a possibility. I think we kind of want to be that second half of the equation. We look at, theoretical pre-production systems and then, what happens to your service out in the wild once you get lots of users or, lots of changes or, the wind blows the wrong way, right? And so I think we want to be half of that equation. And I think we can be half of that equation if we go and figure out for those users that are using Claude Code, which again, I mean, even I was just talking to an SVP of engineering at a very large enterprise, like probably a Fortune 250 company in the world. And they were like, we told everyone a year ago not to use Claude Code, not to use these things. And they just said, I would rather risk getting fired than not use these things. So he was just saying, like, you couldn't control it. It was complete chaos. And I think that's where we are right now, which is how do we go figure out for those people that are using those systems, how do we effectively get to the point where we can be providing that observability? And whether or not we're like a completely separate product or whether or not we're some sort of open source or SDK or some sort of package that people can implement, I think is less relevant. I think I want to go, I've been in the observability space for about 20 years now, and I want to go continue to solve that problem, but the way that we're going to be doing it in the future, not for some traditional legacy platform and system.
So what would be your 3 biggest goals for the next 5 years? What keeps you up at night?
What keeps me up at night? I think, of course there's like, whether it's the SaaS apocalypse that people talk about, or whether it's like, are we all going to have jobs in the future with AI? I get this question quite a bit. So let me start with the SaaS apocalypse. The SaaS apocalypse is, in my mind, has nothing to do with SaaS. It has everything to do with clunky software that was difficult to configure and glue together with other clunky software. I think we have no patience for that in the future. So whether it's an on-prem or SaaS or local, or I think that's the less important part. I think there is just no patience for clunky, hard to use, hard to integrate software. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is I actually have quite an optimistic view of AI in the future with the world. I actually think that, we're all here at a startup summit, right? AI has fundamentally shifted the time horizon, right? So things move a lot faster. What that means is it gives more opportunity to us with a much shorter time frame. I think Anthropic was started as a company, 4.5 years ago, and is close to, by some calculations, close to $1 trillion valuation, right? So the time horizon is tiny at this point. It's like you can go fast and fail and iterate. And my optimistic view of things is that with AI and with the pace of innovation and with everything going so much faster, it opens up opportunity for us to attack incumbents in a much more aggressive manner and be much more successful in a much shorter time horizon. Like the concept of going to from 0 to 100 million in ARR in a matter of, let's call it, 5 to 10 years was a huge success 10 or 15 years ago. Now, companies are effectively doing it overnight, right? Not actually overnight, but that time horizon being smaller, I think, is going to give us a lot of opportunity. And I think it's going to give us the ability to have a tremendous amount more companies, albeit small. They're going to be able to grow so much faster. And I think that opportunity is quite large, and I'm excited for that. So yeah, I think the pessimistic view of it obviously keeps you up at night, but I'm much more in tune with the optimistic view of it, which is it gives us a lot more opportunity.
Yeah, I just wanted to do a quick time check. Do we have time for questions? Okay, yeah, we'll take one question. Go ahead.
thanks. What's the biggest market signal that you're seeing as a leading indicator for both Edge Delta and also for your customers that proves that consumer adoption and willingness to kind of iterate and experiment with the time horizon reducing?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I definitely didn't use the term consumer for a reason. So basically, the way I look at it, you look at like Replit and Lovable, which is like very much a consumer, and I've went and talked to those teams and their leadership, and obviously would love to partner with those. I think they're phenomenal technologies, but a lot of the feedback they actually gave me was like, Ozan, I don't think you understand. Like, our users are not engineers. Like, our users don't know what a log is, don't know what an error is, don't know what an exception is, don't know what a millisecond response time is. Like, the only thing they might care about from your solution might be that, like, your users are spending 50% more time on your app, right? Like they were like, anything more technical than that, and they just don't care. Like, they don't have to care. That's kind of the beauty of these solutions. So definitely, I don't think that, there could be some value that our platform could provide in the consumer space, but what we are seeing in more, I would say, like, so I think about it as a spectrum, right? You have like the Lovable and Vercels on one side. You have like the Claude Code and Cursor and code, like much more technical. And then probably in the middle, I would say, is like, if you've ever used Vercel v0 to go create an app, it's like, okay, it's a little bit more technical, but it kind of still solves some of those things. And I think the signal in the market that I'm seeing is not only within our customer base and how fast, just like the story I said earlier, where even in the Fortune 500, executives cannot control the ICs from just saying, no, you are forbidden from using these tools. People use them anyway, and they're just much more willing to take the risk on getting fired than not use those tools. There's like an investor in Seattle, Aviel, who I chat with every once in a while. He has some great posts online. And he talked about this concept as well, which is like, and this was a post of his probably about like 9 months ago or something like that, where he talked about how people are just rebelling. They're just saying, like, I would literally rather be fired if I'm at a big company that forbids these tools than not use them. And so I think we are seeing that very huge shift in the market. I think any of us that use AI, like, is there a bubble? Yeah, I actually do think there's a bubble. But is the substantial thing underneath that bubble bigger than anything else we've seen in that lifetime? Yes, I also think that it's the most substantial thing that we've ever seen. So, I think those two things can both be true at the same time. But I think what we're seeing from our own internal usage, as well as our customer base, as well as what I'm seeing with other partners and discussions I have with other technology companies in the market, it's hard to think that it's going to go back in Pandora's box. Like, the box has been opened, time moves on, and actually Satya Nadella has like one of my favorite quotes where I think this is when he first became CEO, if I recall correctly. But so this is now what, like, I don't know how many, 13 years ago, 14 years ago. He had this quote where he said, "Our industry does not respect tradition; it only respects innovation." And I think we can look at traditionally how we've done certain things and certain processes and whatever else, but I do not believe AI is going back in Pandora's box. I think time moves on and moves forward. And so for me, that whole concept of like skate to where the puck is going, I have to look at like, where do we think the market's going to be in 2 or 3 years? And nobody knows. There was also like another quote from, I think, a podcast that was like, the people who think they know where the market's going to be in 2 years are sci-fi writers. Like, they're writing sort of believable sci-fi that, when you look at it and tilt your head, it makes sense enough, right? But I think the signals in the market, so I don't know if I'm not answering your question, but I think through osmosis, I think there's enough signals in the market that I don't know that you could pin it on one signal.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was so great chatting with you, Ozan. Thank you,
you.
everyone.